And Cintamani Mataji, she inspires many people to read Srila Prabhupada's books. She inspires me too, and one day I intend on getting more serious myself. Every time I see you, I think I gotta read. And Krishna Dham Prabhu, he's written some retellings of the Ramayana and Mahabharata. I haven't read it, but I've heard the audio version of the Mahabharata, and I do recommend. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant audio version. So now you know how I read. I read by hearing. Okay, so I'm going to leave it to you now, Cintamani Prabhu and Krishna Dham Prabhu. And to everyone who is logged in, it will be an interactive session. Please do not be shy when you're asked questions. You don't have to show your face. You can still hide behind your initials. So yes, anyways, go ahead. I will waste no more time. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Tulsi Savior Prabhu, for inviting us. And it's just so nice of you. I was just going to ask if this is going to be a really interesting discussion, which I hope it will be. I was wondering if you're recording it, because if you do, I'll share it on our Improving Our Sadhu Sangha website.
Yes, I am recording.
Okay, fantastic.
And is it 1 hour, Mataji?
We can go slightly over an hour if you like. I don't mind myself personally. It's up to you and your time if you have enough time.
Okay, so thank you so much. Our topic is discussing Shastra with the family. But before we start talking about that, I don't want to show you this quote until I ask you a question. We hear these two terms, Grihastha and Grihamedi. Grihastha ashram and Grihamedi life. So I thought to start by asking, what do we think is the distinction? How would we define ourselves in any particular family? If you look at yourself, your family, ask yourself, are we Grihasthas or are we Grihamedis? And why do we say that? Whichever decision you come up with, ask yourself, what's our definition? How did we arrive at that conclusion? Would anyone like to be brave enough to share their thoughts on that question with me? Are there any brave souls out there who have thought about it? Are we Grihasthas or Grihamedis? And what's the difference? How can we tell?
Well, the questions come, by messages, because we can't see any messages. We can only see our PowerPoint screen at the moment. Or will you just speak them?
You're welcome to unmute your mic if you'd like to speak, or you can put the questions on the side, and I'm happy to read them out.
So we just like a little bit of feedback from the devotees. What's the difference between a Grihamedi and a Grihastha, and how would we define ourselves? Why? So can you see any activity on that question, on those questions, Tulsi Savior, or shall I answer some insights from Shastra?
There's no activity on that question at the moment. But my understanding, Grihastha is the married life ashram. I've not really gone into Grihamedi.
What's the difference? I mean, it's a Grihastha life ashram, and what makes it an ashram as opposed to?
Can
ideas?
I just a basic understanding. I think it might be that a Grihastha is somebody who lives within their family and practices Krishna Seva, Krishna's consciousness, whereas a Grihamedi is somebody who, I guess, lives with their family and focuses on the family and doesn't necessarily practice spiritual advancement, I think.
What a wonderful answer. We can't actually see anything but our PowerPoint screen. So was that, I'm taking a guess. Is that, who's this speaking?
My name's Shruti Pimjiani. Shruti.
Okay. Shruti Maji, that was an amazing answer. Thank you so much for coming in and participating like that. Very much appreciated. So you're saying a Grihastha, Grihastha ashram is when the family come together to practice the practices, the sadhana of Krishna consciousness. And
Yes.
Grihamedis don't practice any sadhana. They just focus on the requirements and everyday duties of family life. Did I understand you correctly?
Yes.
That was
Yes.
a brilliant answer. I'd also like to share with you now some evidences from, this is an excerpt from the Science of Self-Realization. But before I read this, one other question. How do you know if you're Grihasta or Grihamedi? How do you know if you're properly doing Grihasta life? What should be the telltale sign? We're going to read that in the next slide. But would Shruti Mataji or anybody else like to just give me a shout out? How can we tell? What's that, like the litmus test, if we're doing Grihasta Ashram correctly? How would we know?
We have Mother Gunachita who had a comment. Grihasta does actions for Krishna and Grihamedi for their own sense gratification.
Amazing. So Grihasta works for Krishna and Grihamedi for their own sense gratification. Okay. And how would we know if we're actually working for Krishna? What's the telltale sign? Anyone have a guess at that? I just want to get you thinking about the question, because then when the answer comes, hopefully the answer will connect with you more if you've thought about the question. So any thoughts on that before we actually read what Prabhupada says?
Maybe that if we're trying to be grihastas, our desire is more for Krishna's pleasure. And then if we actually performing Grihasta ashram correctly, then our desire for material enjoyment is becoming less and less, and for spiritual topics is increasing. Whereas with the Grihamedi, probably because I am one, then the desires for material things become greater, and spiritual, it doesn't increase, or it may, due to offense, become less and less.
Wow.
That's my idea, but I don't know whether it's right.
Was that Gunachita Prabhu?
Yeah, it is. I put the camera on.
Okay, fantastic. I can't actually see anything. I can just see my screen.
Can now.
Oh,
So thank you so much. That was a wonderful, can you turn this all the way down? That was a really wonderful response. So you're saying if we're doing Grihasta Ashram correctly, our material desires should be diminishing and our spiritual desires increasing. But if we're leading a Grihamedi life, our material desires will be increasing and our spiritual desires will be stagnant. Did I understand you correctly?
yeah, that was my understanding of it.
Wow, what an amazing light. Thank you so much. And these were brilliant lights that we got from Shruti Prabhu Mataji and from Gunachita Mataji. So, and I'm also going to share a little bit from the Science of Self-Realization on this topic of Grihasta and Grihamedi, how we can know what we are, what are the telltale, what is the key difference, and what are the telltale signs. And you've already touched on much of it, but let's hear from Prabhupada's own words. So I've kind of like edited this, not in order to change the meaning, but just because it was a very long excerpt, and I wanted to kind of like make it a shorter excerpt, but try to keep the meaning. So wherever you see ... if you can see my screen, it means I've taken out chunks of the excerpt, but you can find it in the Science of Self-Realization. A Grihamedi is a person who has tied himself like the goat meant for slaughter in the business of family, society, community, nation, or humanity at large. If he is not inquired about the principles of transcendental life, he should be regarded as a blind man, driven ahead by uncontrolled senses and about to fall into a ditch. That is the description of a Grihamedi. So he's not inquired about the principles of transcendental life. He's just completely dedicated himself to family duties, societal duties, community duties, national duties, humanity duties, and he's made no time for inquiring about the principles of transcendental life. So this is a description of a Grihamedi. Now, the opposite, I'm continuing to read now. The opposite of Grihamedi, however, is the Grihasta. The Grihasta ashram, or the shelter of spiritual family life, is as good as the life of a sannyasi, a member of a renounced order. Regardless of whether one is a householder or a renunciant, the important point is that of relevant inquiries. The Grihamedi, however, is simply interested in the animal necessities of life. So Prabhupada says the important distinction is, are we making relevant inquiries, spiritual inquiries? This is what distinguishes an ashram, whether it's the sannyas ashram or a grihastha ashram, from something which is not an ashram. Those in an ashram are making relevant spiritual inquiries. So I'm going to read a little bit more because from the same extract from Science of Self-Realization, the chapter Relevant Inquiries. So Prabhupada continues to write, by the laws of nature, the Grihamedi's life is full of calamities, whereas the life of the Grihastha is full of happiness. But in the modern human civilization, the Grihamedis are posing as the Grihasthas. Isn't that interesting? Prabhupada saying today, those who are Grihamedis are pretending to be Grihasthas. And he's saying we can tell who's who from the simple litmus test. Do we feel our lives are in crises, or do we feel peaceful and happy? It's not that the Grihastha's life, everything's going to be a bed of roses and they're going to be winning the lottery and, everything's going hunky-dory. Their children never give them any problems, but still they're happy because they're Grihasthas. So the distinction is the Grihasthas are making relevant spiritual inquiries. They're going to Shastra and they're really trying to absorb themselves in Shastra to see their life, how Krishna is acting in their lives, because not a blade of grass is moving without the sanction of the Lord. And because the Grihasthas are making relevant spiritual inquiries, they see in every situation of their life, reversals of good things, bad times, good times, they see the hand of the all-good Lord. And therefore they feel happy because they see how Krishna is helping to elevate them. But the Grihamedi doesn't make these relevant inquiries. So his mind is fixed in the dualities of desire and hate, hankering and lamentation. And therefore all he sees is calamity, reversals. So this is the key distinction. Are we happy? If we're not happy, we're not seeing Krishna's hand in our life. If we're not seeing Krishna's hand in our life, it's because we're not making relevant spiritual inquiries. So that all of that was my comment on this, but I'll just carry on reading a bit more from Prabhupada's Science of Self-Realization. We should therefore know who is what. A Grihamedi's life is full of vices because he does not know how to live a spiritual family life. And I'd like us to make a note of this, how to live a spiritual family life. Prabhupada actually gives us a formula for that in the Bhagavad Gita. He gives us a 4-point plan how to live a spiritual family life so we can be happy. Does anyone know how to live a spiritual family life? You might have read the excerpt from the Gita, or if you have any thoughts of your own, I'd love to hear from you. Please tell me, how do we live a spiritual family life? Please share that with me, because I'm a little tired of hearing the sound of my own voice. You can give me a break from my own voice.
Just getting you in the screen properly.
Any thoughts? Is anyone going to? Is anyone thinking about it? How to live a spiritual family life?
I'll say something because no one else is. My understanding is that you keep the instruction of Guru and Krishna at the center of your family life, and then your whole activities 24/7 should be towards following those instructions. And by the mercy of Guru and Gauranga, then they will help you to, become purified and be on the correct path.
Wow.
So there's lots of instructions within that, personal instructions and general instructions, and also the instructions that Srila Prabhupada, the Acharyas, have left us. That's my understanding.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Wonderful light.
Alison.
Oh, was that Alison? Who was that speaking?
Alison.
It was me, Gunachuda.
Oh,
Gunachuda,
Gunachuda. Thank you so much, Gunachuda Prabhu. So you're saying, I'm going to reflect it back. You're saying it's keeping the instructions of the spiritual master at the very heart of our family life. And that includes personal instructions he gave us, as well as general instructions he gives in his classes and books. And it also includes the instructions of Prabhupada and the previous acharyas give. So we always have to be meditating on their instructions and how we can apply them. And then we will be living a spiritual family life. Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah, you did.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
And it's a beautiful light you've given. And in the next slide, I'm actually going to share an instruction Prabhupada gives as well, to really simplify it for us, to make it easy peasy how to live a spiritual family life. But I'll just finish reading this excerpt. He does not know that beyond his control is a power who supervises and controls his activities, and he has no conception of his future life. The Grihamedi is blind to his future and has no aptitude for making relevant inquiries. Again, this point is coming up, making relevant inquiries. It came up in the previous slide as well, as being the distinction between the Grihamedi and the Grihasta, that the Grihasta makes relevant inquiries about what is truth, what does Krishna want, how do I do that, how do I achieve that. So his only qualification is that he's bound by the shackles of attachment to the false things he has contacted in his temporary existence. So Grihastas are happy. Grihamedi's lives are full of calamities. Grihastas make relevant inquiries, spiritual inquiries. Grihamedis don't. All their inquiries are, how do I pay the bills? How do I get my kids to behave? How do I get dinner made on time? All these day-to-day necessities that we have to make inquiries about, but no time left to make relevant inquiries about the benefit of the soul. So these are some distinctions. And then Prabhupada says we have to know how to live a spiritual family life. So in the next slide, I'm actually going to share Prabhupada's, what I call the 4 wheels of happy family life that Prabhupada gives in Bhagavad Gita. This is from Bhagavad Gita chapter 13. It's from the purport of text 8 to 12. So it's a really long purport, but one of those paragraphs, Prabhupada says this: the best process for making the home pleasant is Krishna consciousness. If one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy. Again, this idea of if you're doing it right, you're going to be happy. This point comes up a lot in Prabhupada's teachings. If you're doing it right, you must be happy. I don't know if anyone heard the class I gave this morning, but I cited another quote from Prabhupada where he says, if you're doing it right, you must be happy. If you're not happy, then you're doing something in the name of Krishna consciousness, but you need to rectify. Not change what you're doing, but rectify. Learn how to do it properly. Because if we're doing it properly, we will be happy. This is the promise of the scriptures, of Krishna, of the acharyas, of Prabhupada. If we do Krishna consciousness correctly, we will be happy. This is an important point. So if one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy, because this process of Krishna consciousness is very easy. Now, Prabhupada is going to give us a 4-point plan. Just these 4 things we need to do. One need only, 1, chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. 2, accept the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna. 3, have some discussion on books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. And 4, engage oneself in deity worship. These 4 things will make one happy. One should train the members of his family in this way. So when we first got married, there's quite a few of us got married around the same time, and I think nearly all of us were doing 3 of these 4 things. I'd just like to ask, how many of these 4 things do you do at home? If any brave people want to say you do, which of them you do, just maybe a quick little shout out. If anyone wants to share which of these 4 things, maybe you do all 4 of them at home with your families.
Well, Hare Krishna Mother Cintamani, thank you. That's lovely. I do 4, but let's say twice a year, as in them. But like deity worship is not every day. Discussing on a random. So would you say, how is that relevant? Is it every day? That's what we're supposed to do? Because that's For myself, swollen soul, I don't see that happening, but you can tell us how to do it every day. I would love to hear how that's going to work.
Gurangi Prabhu, is it Gurangi?
It is Mother Chintamani. Lovely to see
Hare
you.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Lovely to hear you. I can't see you, but it's lovely to hear you. So you're very honest. You're saying, well, you do these, but not every day. You know, occasionally, occasionally you can do them. But you're thinking, are we meant to be doing these 4 things every single day? Because that's a bit unrealistic. I mean, we all know the pressures of family life. Once you've got 2 kids or 3, it's like school runs, dinners, squabbles, money. It's just, life's intense. So how on earth are we going to do twice, more than occasionally? So I'll tell you the quotes I've heard from Prabhupada. Okay, so I've heard him say to a grihasta, I think it was Kishore Dakasha Vishnu Prabhu, who was an Indian-bodied grihasta, one of his Prabhupada's first disciples, Indian-bodied disciples in London. He was living at home with his family, and Prabhupada installed the deities in his house. And he said, you should come together once a week at least and discuss Bhagavad Gita. Of course, they had installed deities, so I guess they were worshipping their deities every day, and they were initiated devotees, so they were chanting their 16 rounds every day and probably accepting prasadam. But the one thing that they found difficult to do every day was discuss books like Gita and Bhagavatam. And Prabhupada said, at least once a week, you must make time. He said, on the weekend, you must come together and discuss books like Gita and Bhagavatam. And my husband and myself do it every day. We started off 1 day a week because my life was in crises. There is a quote that I kept in reserve at the very end of the PowerPoint, which I can show you later. But when we were married for around 11 years, and our marriage was in crises. My mental health was in crises. Our finances were in crises. Everything basically was in crises. And so I just began doing this every day. I was thinking, well, I've put in my lot with Krishna so far. I just really hope Krishna saves us. And after a few years, we realized how much that one discussion, it doesn't have to be a long discussion, just husband and wife, and our children would join us when they were little, and occasionally now. They do it in their own homes with their own families now. But we would come together and we'd discuss Bhagavad Gita just for half an hour. We started just initially with Bhagavad Gita, and then after a couple of years, we realized that this was helping us so much that we began doing the full ISKCON sandwich. Prabhupada gave us Bhagavatam in the morning and Gita in the evening. But that, we didn't force ourselves to do that. That came because we began to realize that we were spending a lot of time speaking, but our speaking to each other was fighting. And since we began doing this, we don't waste so much time. We don't waste all that time fighting anymore. We bring our problems to our Gita discussion or our Bhagavatam discussion. And after we hear Prabhupada, we think, okay, what have I understood? What is Prabhupada telling me? What's Krishna telling me? And how can this help me in my life? How can this shed some light on the current crises or the current dilemmas we're experiencing? And slowly, by beginning to do this every day, we actually saved time, because before we used to waste hours arguing. And now we just have to speak to each other half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening, and our relationship is very pleasant and no more crises. So it's just putting in that if you can't do it every day, discuss books like Gita and Bhagavatam at least once a week with your family, with your husband, especially if you can. If you can't do it with your husband, with a good friend, you have a grown-up child, with a child, it only takes one person. I did it for 2 years alone before my husband began joining me. I would just write down, what is Prabhupada telling me? How can this help me? So thank you for sharing that, Gaurangi. And I hope that the light I shared about trying to do it once a week, I hope that sounds feasible to parents. I know your lives are busy. We've been there. We had 3 small children. They're grown up now. But I realize how difficult things can be. But just one thing I wanted to share with everyone is that when we first got married, we were only doing 3 of them. We were chanting our japa. In the beginning, we were eating only remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna, only prasadam. And we had our little altar that we used to wave our incense at and our flower at, you know. But we weren't discussing books like Gita and Bhagavatam. And you know what it's like, 1 child, 2 child, pressures of life, 3 children, and soon you're not even chanting your 16 rounds. You just don't have time for it. And little by little, you're eating sandwiches from Greg's, you know, you're not even eating only prasadam, and your deities, you stop even waving that incense stick at it. It's just life's too difficult, you know, because if we're not hearing from Prabhupada, you know, all the rest of it is going to fall away. All the rest of it is going to start seeming irrelevant when we've got so many, what was it Prabhupada said in the very first, I'm just going to go back to the very first quote I shared. He said, we've tied ourselves like goat meant for slaughter in the business of family life. Yeah, so we sometimes do feel like, so everything is getting on top of me. This is so relevant. I can't make times for 16 rounds, and I just got to pick up a sandwich from Greg's or from Tesco's or something. And dearly worship, there's too much to be asked. But if we're not hearing this exactly, I mean, that's how I began feeling. All the things I was doing began slipping. It's when we began not just reading Gita, but discussing it together, that things began changing for us. And I mean, really changing. Mental health improved. Funnily enough, even our finances improved. Our relationship, our marital relationship improved. Everything went from black to white. And this is one of the reasons why whenever I see a devotee, I say, are you discussing Prabhupada's books? Most devotees cross the corridor when they see me coming. They're like, oh no, here she comes, she's going to ask us. But the reason is because it has such a profound effect on our lives, you know, and I really do believe that Prabhupada's formula here works. It really does work. But we have to put in this very important part of the formula, at least once a week, coming together, husband and wife, and discussing books like Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam. So I'm just going to move forward. But before I move forward, I'm going to just raise one question, one point. That is, one of the problems why we don't discuss Gita and Bhagavatam, and what are the things that put me and my husband off initially, it took us 5 years to go from squabbling like cats and dogs when we sat down to read Gita together to actually having a really enjoyable discussion, which mutually helped us, which we both felt, wow, that really helped. You know, it took 5 years of hearing Prabhupada and thinking, oh, maybe we should try doing what Prabhupada said. But for the first 5 years, we would just squabble like cats and dogs. We didn't like to sit together and discuss the scriptures. It was such an unpleasant experience for both of us, you know. So the problem is that we're not trained how to discuss scripture in a way that we want to discuss it together. We don't look forward to it because whenever we do try it, it often becomes a kind of an unpleasant experience. But it should be a really enjoyable experience. You know how we sit down to watch telly because we just want to relax? We just want to kick off our shoes and just, I just need to relax. That's what our discussions of Gita and Bhagavatam should feel like to us. And if we know how to do it correctly, if we're trained to do it correctly, so it's pleasant, it will be. It'll be a time that we come together to really, let the problems of the day wash off us and rejuvenate us. But for the discussions to be like that, we know we have to learn how to discuss according to the principles of Vada. There's a technical term for you. Vada discussions. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, text 32 of spiritual sciences, I am Vada. And in that purport, Prabhupada talks about the distinction between different types of discussion. So I'm just going to throw in a little bit of technicality here. There's 3 different kinds of discussion: Vada, Vitanda, and Jalpa. Vada is very harmonious. Vada, we're working together. We're pleasant to each other. Vitanda and Jalpa is very argumentative. It's very combative. You're wrong. I'm right. You're wrong. You're rubbish. You know, and it's unpleasant. But Vada is very mutually nice. So we have to learn to discuss like that. And I'm going to share with you a couple of verses from the Gita and then a couple of verses from the Bhagavatam to make these points I've just been saying. And these verses make one additional point, that when we learn to discuss like this, when we learn to discuss in a way which is actually pleasing and satisfying to the people in the discussion, both to husband and wife, to our children, we enjoy it. When we learn to discuss like that, our discussions give pleasure to Krishna. And when Krishna is pleased by those exchanges, Krishna personally steps into our life and helps with the details. He helps with all those problems that we can't solve this problem. He helps with everything, and he guides us how to gradually come to him. So if we please him. So let's look at some of these verses. Now this is from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, text 9. I'll skip the Sanskrit for now because I'm very aware I've gone on much longer than I wanted to, and I do want to give my husband time to say his bit. But the English is, the thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. Their lives are fully devoted to my service, and they derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. So the internal is our thoughts are devoted to Krishna and we're always wanting to please him. And the external activity of these devotees whose thoughts are always with Krishna, what are they doing externally? They're deriving great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about him. That's what we do. That's what devotees do. That's what grihastas do. Husband and wife come together, like Prabhu said, and just derive great satisfaction and bliss from enlightening one another and conversing about Krishna. And then Krishna says, you may know what Krishna says, but let's read it together. He says in 10:10 and 10:11 that it's to these devotees that he gives the understanding by which to come to him. It's to these devotees that he, dwelling in their hearts, destroys with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. It's to these devotees that he gives the intelligence how to solve the problems of their life really, fully. So, because he's pleased. And to make this point again, and even more clearly, the same point comes up in Canto 11. Canto 11 of the Bhagavatam, let me just show it to you. Chapter 3. Sorry, I'm just having a little difficulty moving. There it is. Canto 11, chapter 3, text 30. And then we'll see in 31 as well. So text 30, Shukadeva Goswami says, one should learn how to associate with the devotees of the Lord by gathering with them to chant the glories of the Lord. So we have to learn how to do it. You know, we have to learn, we have to be trained in the principles of good sadhu sangha. And that Prabhupada makes the same point in another purport. He says it in Canto 3, chapter 3, text 6 purport. Prabhupada says, one has to be, unless one is trained in the culture of good association, one cannot be good. So this same point is made here. One has to learn how to associate with devotees. There's certain principles, the principles of Vada. So we have to learn how to discuss Shastra according to the principles of Vada, which is very pleasant. He says, then he goes on in the verse, this process is most purifying. As devotees thus develop their loving friendship, they feel mutual happiness and satisfaction, and by thus encouraging one another, they are able to give up material sense gratification, which is the cause of all suffering. So if we're discussing Shastra correctly, the loving friendship between husband and wife, the loving friendship between parent and child should be developing. And we should both be feeling happiness and satisfaction. And we should both be feeling, I can do this, you know. This is doable. I can become Krishna conscious. This can replace my sense gratification. We should begin feeling that this is so nice and doable for me if we learn to discuss the glories of the Lord in a correct way together. And then in the next text, Shukadeva says, this also pleases Krishna when we do this. And Krishna, when he's pleased by this activity, takes away all the impediments in our lives. So let's read what Shukadeva says. The devotees of the Lord constantly discuss the glories of the personality of Godhead among themselves. Thus they constantly remember the Lord and remind one another of his qualities and pastimes. In this way, by their devotion to the principles of bhakti yoga, the devotees please the personality of Godhead, who takes away from them everything inauspicious. Being purified of all impediments, the devotees awaken to pure love of Godhead, and thus even within this world, their spiritualized bodies exhibit symptoms of transcendental ecstasy, such as standing of the bodily hairs on end. So this point especially, by practicing this discussing together in a pleasing way, in a satisfying way, we please Krishna, and Krishna removes the inauspicious things from our lives. And this has certainly been our case. I share a little bit about our own story on our website, Improving Our Sadhu Sangha, in the About Me section. I won't bore you with it here and now, but we had every problem in the book. We both had abusive childhoods, so we both carried with us a lot of trauma from our childhoods. You know, we were financially, we made some really silly choices. We decided to open a preaching center rather than get a job or career. And suddenly we were left with 3 children and no income. And our lives, we had painted ourselves into a mess. But by doing this one activity, Krishna gradually, one by one, removed all the impediments of our lives. And so we went from crises to kind of like steadiness, and gradually towards a more progressive life. And I'm sure this worked for us because the scriptures promise it, Prabhupada promises it, Shukadev Goswami promises it, and it's worked in our lives. I'm sure it can work for anybody. At the very end of this presentation, when my husband has made his, we have the URL of our website, improvingsangha.com, where we share everything that we heard from Prabhupada, how we apply it. We've got it both in written form and video form. For those of you who don't have time to read, you can just put a video on and listen to what we share. And just once a week, come together, experiment with improving your discussion techniques, experiment talking about what Prabhupada is saying in Gita or Bhagavatam with your husband, with your wife, with your children. And I'm very convinced that if we do this properly, we can all become happy. So thank you so much for tolerating my my sharing with you, and my husband is now going to speak.
There you go. Hare Krishna. Yeah, so my particular contribution here is really to address the fathers. I mean, I don't know if there's any fathers actually present in the here today, but I hope so. I shan't bother asking. So I wanted to start by just really, asking the question, well, what do you think marriage is meant for? We've come together, husband and wife, and what is the purpose of that? I don't know if anyone would like to have a go at answering that question, especially. Are there any fathers present? I suppose I should know, really. Or is it all the mums and kids?
Prabhu, as the head teacher, I can see that there's quite a few of the dads there. Their names are up anyway.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
I think what I'll do is I'll run through this because we're running out of time. So, and then at the end, if there's any questions or comments, then we can take them. So let me just run through. So this is from the third canto, and marriage is actually a duty. This is Prabhupada in the purport, performed in mutual cooperation as directed in the authoritative scriptures for spiritual advancement. Therefore, marriage is essential in order to avoid the life of cats and dogs who are not meant for spiritual enlightenment. So, the primary purpose, marriage, grihasta, is an ashram. We have our different duties. Of course, we are, we work, and that's our varna, sort of, in this day and age. But there's also ashram, and we're getting married into grihasta ashram, as my wife started by saying, rather than grihamedi. And the key difference is that it's aimed at spiritual advancement, and that is the duty really that the husband really has to take on. That this is what we're trying to achieve, and the wife is traditionally the yagya patni. She's assisting in that sacrifice of ashram, of grihasta ashram. And the duty of the husband is given in here in the 5th canto. This is, as some of you may know, Lord Rishabhadev speaking. One who cannot deliver his dependents from the path of repeated birth and death should never become a spiritual master, a father, a husband, a mother, or a worshipable demigod. So this is quite a grave responsibility that we have as fathers. And reading this, you might think, well, hold on a minute. How can I deliver anyone? I'm having enough trouble delivering myself. What to speak of my dependents? But the way I view this is that this is like the mission. A mission is something which you're trying to move towards. It's not something which you can necessarily accomplish immediately. But this is the mission statement, really, for the householder, for the grihasta in the grihasta ashram. We're trying to deliver. So central to everything else we're doing, this has to be the primary aim. So to perform the activities which will move us in this direction, as my wife was also quoting, the Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada outlines those 4 things which we can do. And I found that, what I've tried to do over the years is prioritize those, not allow my life to be structured in such a way that they become an impossibility. Prabhupada often uses the term mold your life in such a way that these things are there. And if this is the mission, if this is the primary aim of household life, then adjustments may need to be made. We can be ambitious to improve our material situation by doing more work, getting a better job, which means I have to get up early in the morning, leave the house at 6 o'clock in order to commute. Of course, right now, you can't commute anywhere, which is perhaps good. But that's going to change very soon. And, if we're going back to that sort of lifestyle, leaving the house at 7 o'clock, no time, trying to chant our rounds on the train, in the car, or at lunchtime at work, leaving behind the family to, make their own way somehow. The mother and the children are there struggling because whilst I'm, also struggling, I'm going to work, coming back late at night, too tired to do anything other than take my prasadam. And then maybe, if we're lucky, might, finish my rounds or do a little kirtan or something, then take rest and then get up next day, start all over again. Then this is not molding our lives in such a way that we can structure in these important elements of hearing and chanting together with the family. I think this has to be the most important thing. And if it means, I've got to row back on my material ambitions, perhaps it means that I'm living in a smaller house, or I have an older car, or I don't have that latest iPad or that latest Mac computer or whatever it may be. Then so be it. This has to be the priority. That we're not missing the point. That we're doing very well materially, but spiritually we're struggling. My wife was Cintamani was talking about how in our early days we struggled in so many ways, and it was only when we began to realize that this is the priority, that the hearing and chanting together, not on my own. Sometimes we hear this idea that if the husband is making advancement, the wife will automatically make advancement, the family. Well, yes, they will. But what does that mean? How do we unpack that? What is the automatic element there? And I understand that to mean because I will then share with them. I will then, get them involved in the spiritual practices. Because I'm feeling spiritually enlivened, I will naturally share that with my family. Not that, well, I'm making advancement. When I was a young grihasta, I was a temple president in Manchester. We opened the center in Manchester. And I would go in the mornings for Mangalarti, and I would be there with the devotees in the temple. I would give the class and, you know, everything like that. And my wife would come with me. And then we had one child, and she still managed to come with me for a little while. And then we had two, and then it became a struggle. And then we had three, and it became impossible. But I was continuing. I was going in and, you know, Mangalati, yes, everything, you know. And then she was left at home with the three children, and it was a real struggle for her. And then, you know, she was finding it hard, somehow managed to chant her rounds, Girishnik, 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 you know, making a hissing sound, as Prabhupada says in one place, but really not, you know, too stressed, too pressured to really connect with the holy name. And what to speak of read the books and, you know, hear from Prabhupada or anything. And it became a crisis of faith for her. And when I realized that, I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? You know, here I am, you know, forging ahead in my spiritual life while she's struggling. And I've seen that happen. I've seen, you know, devotees do that. And then their wives have lost their faith, you know, and then everything's finished. If the ashram collapses, then, you know, where are you? You're finished. The husband suffers. It's a you know, lose. So you can't do that. You've got to really ensure that those in your care are actually protected. You know, protection doesn't mean that I just give them a house and food. It means I protect their spiritual life. I ensure that they're actually making progress, that they're not losing their faith, that they're not just floundering in the ocean of material existence while I am forging ahead. I'm going out, I'm doing all the preaching, you know, I'm doing great. I'm going to the temple, I'm doing service, and there's the wife at home grappling with the kids, with the laundry, with the cooking, with the cleaning, you know, with everything, and no time for anything else. So really, I personally think that's misplaced priority, and it's going to lead to a disaster, a calamity in your life, you know, because if your ashram is not strong, this is the foundation. The ashram is the foundation of our spiritual life. So we can't let that happen. So here is a little bit more from Rishabhadev. Ordinarily, the spiritual master, husband, father, mother, or superior relative accepts worship from an inferior relative. But here, Rishabhadev forbids this. First, the father, spiritual master, or husband must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. If he cannot do this, he plunges himself into the ocean of reproachment for his unlawful activities. Everyone should be very responsible and take charge of his dependents, just as a spiritual master takes charge of his disciple or a father takes charge of his son. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged honestly unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and death. So this is an important point. You know, the husband, the father, he's the guru. Yes, he's the spiritual master of the family. But what does that mean? And here Prabhupada's explaining, it doesn't mean that we just accept worship, that, you know, my wife cooks for me, she, whatever, you know, massages my feet, looks after me, does so many things. But then what's my responsibility? My responsibility is to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. You know, Prabhupada says, it is the duty of the superior to give fearlessness to the subordinate, to take charge of someone, therefore, either as a father, mother, spiritual master, relative, or husband. One must accept the responsibility to give his ward freedom from the fearful situation of material existence. In one place, Srila Prabhupada said to one time to one householder, he wrote to him, "Why don't you become a real guru?" Is it here? I'll come to that shortly. Yeah. Is it here? Yeah. So why don't you become a real guru to your wife, to your children, and instruct Bhagavad Gita as it is? This is our mission. You sit down in the evening, chant Hare Krishna mantra, teach little instruction from the Bhagavad Gita. See how the life changes. Is that very difficult task? You know, see how the life changes. As this Cintamani said at the beginning of the presentation, happiness is our goal. We're trying to become happy, you know, really deeply satisfied and peaceful, not just materially successful. We want to be happy, actually spiritually happy. So this is the business. You know, it may be that we've succeeded greatly in our spirit, in our material aspirations, but we're miserable. You know, our family are suffering, our children are suffering. So that's not success. That's not what we're aiming to do. That's not what we're trying to achieve. So become a real guru. And the best way to do that is sit down in the evening, just in the evening, even if you can't do it in the morning because you've got to rush off, got to get the kids ready for school, you know, got to get the packed lunches ready or whatever it may be, you know, then at least in the evening, you know, don't make it so that you're coming back so late and you're so shattered that you can't do anything. Make this a priority. Whatever it takes, you can do that. It's somehow, the adjustment has to be made. And do it. I mean, even if you can't do it every day, some days, at the weekend, start somewhere and do something.
You'll see the difference.
And you'll begin to experience the difference. You'll see how the life changes. And we specifically recommend that you do it by this process of discussing together, because you can give a class, you know, I mean, the father may think, well, I should sit down and give the class, you know, let them listen, I'm the guru. Okay, fine. But at least allow some time for discussion. We do this in a systematic way where, you know, both of us are discussing as equals. And because if you're hearing, Prabhupada says hearing means chanting, hearing means repeating. To actually hear, you should repeat. So the process of discussion really allows for that we hear and then we repeat what we've heard, and then we let the other person do the same thing. Hear, that means to read Prabhupada's book and then repeat what we've understood, and then reflect back the other person's understanding. That process you'll see on the website. We'll give you the link at the end. I'm sure some of you are already familiar with that. And why is that important? Because why is it that we lose our faith? Because we have doubts, we have confusions about the philosophy. You know, they're there in the heart. And if we're not addressing those, then they will eat us up, you know, and eventually they'll fester in the heart and our faith will break. And when it's broken, it's a very difficult task to put it back together again. You know, so don't let it get to that point. Once you've lost your faith, it's very difficult to recover it. You know, you've got something so valuable. Your Shraddha, your faith in Krishna, is like, you know, it's inconceivable, its value, that you have some faith in the pure devotee, that you've come in touch with the pure devotee. If you lose that, you know, that's like losing the greatest possible treasure that you could have possessed. So don't let that happen. And that will happen if you don't address the doubts. And the way to address your doubts is to discuss, is to bring them out. Because when we associate with the pure devotee, when we hear from him, then, you know, that challenges us, that challenges our understanding, that challenges our paradigm, that goes into the ear, sits on the lotus of the heart. And that's where the doubts are festering, and they come out. And when we repeat what we've heard, then we ask ourselves the question, does that make sense to me? Do I accept that? Srila Prabhupada said that in the very beginning. You don't just hear passively. You ask yourself the question, do I accept what the Swami's saying, or don't I? Why don't I? You know, what is it that this is challenging? What is this bringing out in me? So when you externalize those doubts in the association of other devotees, and that can be one devotee, your wife, you know, your children, they're all devotees. So when you externalize these questions and these doubts in the association of other devotees, you get the chance to address them. The way we work is, the way we discuss is, someone will, you know, say, well, I don't know if I accept that. Why is Prabhupada saying that? Like my wife, in the, you know, when she was going through a crisis of faith, thank God she never actually fully lost her faith, but she would feel challenged. She would read statements that Srila Prabhupada had made and say, how can he say that? That's ridiculous. I don't accept that. You know, and then I would reflect it back. So what I understand you to be saying is, you think that's ridiculous, and you don't accept it. You know, but then we would get to the crux of the issue. You know, why don't you accept it? Because of this and that, and so. And then I'd reflect that back, and then I would say, well, how would you answer your doubt? And then that makes you, you know, become introspective and start thinking, well, yeah, how would I answer? And then you can really start to deal with it, because when you answer your own questions, you've really answered them. Someone else may answer your question, well, yeah, tell you, you know, it's like this, it's like that. You shouldn't have those doubts. You know, Prabhupada said this, Prabhupada said that. and batter you with the philosophy, and you're like, okay, yeah, I guess you're right. Oh, well, yeah, fair enough then. But a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. They have to answer their own doubts. We have to answer our own doubts. And that's what we do with these discussions. This is the most important aspect of it, as I understand, in my experience. So as a husband, this is the most important duty. Here is a Prabhupada letter. I'll just finish with this. Marriage between husband and wife means that the husband must forever be responsible for the wife's well-being and protection in all cases. That does not mean that now there is agreement between us, therefore I am responsible. But as soon as there is some disagreement, then I immediately flee the scene and become so-called renounced. Whether your husband likes to take responsibility as your spiritual guide or not, that does not matter. He must do it. It is his duty because he has taken you as his wife. Therefore, he must take full responsibility for you the rest of his life. And you must also agree to serve him under all circumstances and assist him in every way so that he may make advancement in Krishna consciousness. So I think we've run out of time, so I'm going to stop there and ask if anyone would like to ask questions. But I'm just putting this up on the screen because, my wife and I, but obviously both of us were talking about the various methodologies that we employ in our discussions. And I highly recommend that you have a quick look at, when you get a chance, this website, and you'll see there principles and tips about how to do these discussions. And it's there in video form. You can see demonstrations and everything. And another thing is that we're always happy to assist. My wife and I, if there's any husbands there that are thinking of trying this and you're finding it difficult, whatever your problems or questions, and please do get in touch. And we'll, be very happy to try and assist in that and answer any questions you may have. But I'm conscious now that we've gone over the hour, and I don't know if anyone does have any questions or any points that they'd like to bring up. But I'd like to thank you for listening. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Yeah, you want to take it up?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Haribo, can you hear us?
Yes, I just want to say thank you very much for this wonderful, wonderful talk that you've given. I'm sure lots of people will be inspired. But I have a question. What happens to single parents? How can they adjust to this life that you've just spoken about?
Satya Mataji, Hare Krishna.
Yes, Hare Krishna.
So nice to hear you here.
You too.
Did you want to take that, or do you want me to?
Go ahead. Yeah, just make sure you're in the screen. Look.
Okay, so let me just reflect back your question first, Satya Mataji, because that's answered. So you're saying that's very good if there's a mother and father there, but if there's just a mother or just a father who's trying to raise the children, earn a livelihood, how on earth are they going to do this? And also there's no spouse there to do a discussion with. How on earth can they do it? Did I understand you correctly?
Yes.
So, I remember, did anyone read that book, Legacy of Love, about Heladini? Anyone read it, Legacy of Love? Heladini?
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, she was one of your god sisters, an incredible lady in New Vrindavan. But her service timetable was just unbelievable. But what we can do if we don't have time to sit and read, the thing is, I did it for a while just by reading one sentence a day and then just putting that in my own words. I would read it and then write it in my own words. And then I'd ask, do I have any questions? Does this make sense? When I had a husband, I could ask my questions. You don't have a husband, we can ring a friend or I put my questions up on Facebook. If we don't have time even to do that, I highly recommend you put a Prabhupada lecture on. If you're anything like me, your mind will probably be everywhere. You'll not be listening, but you'll hear something. That's what will always happen to me. In fact, the one thing I would hear in the whole lecture would be the thing I most needed to hear. So you'll hear something in the day. Just put a Prabhupada lecture on as you're making the packed lunches and you're driving to work. Just one a day if you can't do anything else. And you'll hear something. Share that one thing. Just repeat it. Repeat it in your own words. When you see your friend or to your kids, when you pick them up from school. Do you know what I heard Prabhupada say today? Prabhupada said, blah, blah, blah. Just repeat it. This hearing and repeating. Krishna sees. I always say to myself, we always say to each other and to our kids, it's in like a pin, out like a plow. Just put it in as a pin. Hearing from Prabhupada and then repeating. If it's only one sentence or one snippet from a lecture, hear it and repeat it. It starts like that. I don't know if that helped at all or if you feel satisfied with that as a response.
No, that's fine. Quite happy. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Did you want to say anything to that?
About the question. Well, does anyone have any other questions before we, say anything else?
I have a comment and a bit of a question. It's Gunachuda again. When I was teaching in Mayapur, I had the privilege to also be with some of the teenage students. Here I just teach primary. And I was thinking that what you said about, that you would say to your wife, oh, well, how would you answer your doubts? How would you answer your own question? And do you think that would be a good thing to do with teenagers when they're having doubts? Because Mila Mataji said one of the things is not to get into an argument with your teenager if they're having a crisis of faith or, they're showing doubts. So have you tried this on your own children? Sorry if you don't mind me asking. Just saying to them when they're coming up with something about, like my son, for example, well, why should I chant? I'm not thinking of Krishna when I'm chanting, so why should I do it? Do you think does it work if you kind of reflected back, well, how would you answer your question? What would you do?
Yeah, okay. You're saying, would this, I suggested that you have a discussion and you allow each partner, the wife, the husband, to voice their doubts, confusions, whatever, and then the process is that they're then asked, how would you answer your own question? Would that work with teenagers? They may have objections to the process, like why should I chant? There's no point. I'm not thinking of Krishna. So would I recommend that you employ this process with them? Yes, I think good communications is key in all relationships, and we've discovered that by constantly practicing this process of discussing together and using these techniques of empathic hearing, reflective listening, active listening, it then spills over into all of your life, and it's brilliant. I mean, it's the only way to communicate. If someone is voicing, especially an emotional issue for them, then you have to simply hear them and understand them. You can't respond, immediately. I've done this on so many occasions, and just sometimes spent an hour just understanding the other person without voicing a single view of my own, a single response of my own. So many things I wanted to say, but I didn't say them because I knew if I said them, it would just spoil the whole thing and it would just close the other person down completely. So you've just got to let them voice and empathically hear them, whatever they want to say. And then, yes, I mean, you could say to them, if it is a doubt of their own, a question that they have, then invite them to answer it. And it's definitely an effective method of communication, in my opinion. And I really don't think there's other ways it can be done, because if you just come back, if you just fire, but yes, but hold on a minute, you're wrong, and then start name calling and so many things, it's a disaster, and it destroys the trust and it destroys the relationship. So it's really worth investing in understanding these methods of communication, in studying them, in learning them. And we read some books actually when I mean, that's for perhaps another time, but about how to communicate in this kind of way, and the effectiveness of it as opposed to just responding. So yes, my answer to you is try it.
May I also add to what you were saying?
Yeah.
Again, thank you very much for a wonderful question. When our teenagers went to outside schools like your son, and in fact, not only did they get a lot of skepticism and faithlessness from other students in the outside schools, but they were also associating and knew the older Gurukulas from a generation above theirs who had experienced negative things in ISKCON, who also passed down a lot of doubts and faithlessness to them. And luckily, because we had a good relationship, because we never lectured them, we'd always listen to them without, you think that we were never judgmental, like my husband said, we'd never just come in at them. We'd understand them and let them express their doubts. So they would come to us with those doubts. Yeah, but mom, dad, what about this? And this, and we heard this, and what about, and they'd have doubts about ISKCON, they'd have doubts about God per se, about religion per se. They'd come back with all of this to us. And every time, like my husband said, we would just reflect it back. Well, that's a really interesting point. Let's reflect back the point, and let them keep exploring their doubt as far as they wanted to. And when they finished exploring it, we'd be very kind of like, that's a really interesting point. We'd never say things like, you think that? That's ridiculous. How dare you say that? I'm sure you wouldn't say that either. But we'd just be like, that's a really good point. They often say to them, well, how would you reply to that? Like my husband said. If they didn't have a reply, oftentimes they would reply to their own doubt once they felt fully understood, as my husband was expressing. Once they felt fully validated, they often did have a very good light to their own doubt. But if they didn't, then we would, in a very kind of like non-confrontational way, say, well, these are some of my thoughts on it. This is how I think about it. And because we had taken the time to really hear them and treat them respectfully, they were able to respectfully hear what we were sharing. We want our kids to respect our view. We have to treat them with respect. And then they'll hear us respectfully. So those were some of the things we did. And by God's grace, I mean, that none of us, no one in our family is a superstar. We all struggle with our individual problems, but they have some faith. And if we have faith, we have a starting point.
Yeah, I mean, with the process of discussion, you have to practice something called bracketing, because, this is also when we're discussing Shastra, and someone may say their understanding of Shastra, and you think, gosh, that's completely wrong. They haven't got a clue what they're talking about, but you don't say that or anything. You've got a different light or a different perspective on it. That's okay. But you just bracket that and you reflect back what they've said without, bringing in your response, your judgment, your rebuttal or whatever. And when we're talking to anyone at any time, really, this has to be the process, that we're understanding them. Okay, our response is there. Bracket that. Keep that. You'll get a chance. Just be patient. You'll get a chance to say what you think, but then you can say it, owning it. This is what I think. This is how I see it. Not that, well, you're wrong. That's ridiculous, because that's really not helpful in any kind of communication. So in our discussions and in our dealing with our children, we always use this technique, this method of ensuring that we keep our responses to ourselves until they're fully understood, and then when the moment comes, we may give them, but owning them, using I statements. I feel this, I think this, rather than any kind of you're wrong, you're this, you're that, you're so many things. And but all this is explained on the website, so please do take a look at that.
Did that satisfy you, Guruchuta Prabhu?
Yeah, it did. And I think, that you're, and thanks for the comprehensive answer. I think because you're actually practicing what you're advising, it's it makes sense and it's practical. You know, and that key point about being respectful when you're in a discussion about, you know, maybe someone's difficulties they have in their faith, and especially with teenagers, is really important. And we did try to do that in the school in Mayapur, but sometimes it's when it's your own child and then I'm like, go, well, you know, you have to chant anyway, even if it is inattentive, and don't worry if you're making offenses, just chant your rounds. Your bead bag's got cobwebs on it, Gopal, you know. And it's kind of hard to practice that type of listening, at least with me, you know. So I don't say much to him anymore about the chanting. I just trust him that when he says, I am chanting, Mum, so I just leave it at that. Or I might tell him something nice that I've had when I've been chanting that day. But I did, you know, hearing from you, I think it's like it's not blank fire, because you're actually practicing what you're saying, you know, is the process. So I appreciate that, and that you've given your time today to us. Thank you.
Guruchuda, I realize we're out of time, but do you mind if I just quickly share something with you?
Sure, I'd be happy.
It's not how we start, it's how we finish. And our kids may not chant through some of their teenage years or early adulthood. They may not. That's not the point. We may force them to chant now and put them off chanting for life. So as soon as they're out of home, out of sight, they never speak to us again and they never chant again. Or we may leave them with a very deep, loving bond and respect for us, that when they need it, when life's right, they will turn to the chanting. And I just want to give you a little anecdote from our own personal life. When our kids were going through their teens and I was pulling out my hairs, you know, thinking, oh my God, you know, it's like, what am I dealing with here? I was one day chanting my rounds in Prabhupada's room, and a middle-aged man walked in and offered his obeisance to Prabhupada, and there was only the two of us in the room. So he began speaking to me, and he was telling me that when he was a young man, a teenager and a young adult, his mother was a devotee and would always tell him, take shelter of Krishna, chant Krishna's name. And he said, I never listened to her. I'd always say, oh, Mom, you're so fat-brained, you know. And he never did it. But he said, now my mum's passed away. And he said, now I'm going through crises in my life. And now I'm remembering what she's telling me. And I began chanting. So we don't know what the future holds. And I think the most important thing for us is to cultivate a loving, respectful relationship. We can't force them. We can force them when they're living under our roof, maybe, or they'll just be lying to us. We just force them into lying. But if we don't force it now, that's not important. It's not how we start, it's how we finish. It's what will they do later in life when they remember us? Will they remember us with respect and affection and think, my mum would always chant, maybe it's time I started? Or will they think, I'll never do that again? So we shouldn't be in a rush to get it, you know, just a little patience and building those loving relationships.
And setting the right examples.
And setting the right example.
They'll do what you do, not what you say, ultimately.
So thank you so much for allowing us to share with you. I hope we haven't offended anyone, and we feel very grateful to have had this association.
Are we allowed to ask one more question, or are we like really out of time?
We're happy. It's up to you.
It's up to you.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm very grateful because obviously, I mean, I have a 21-year-old stepson who I had some serious discussions with about the existence of God. And when you mentioned the faith, you know, Mother Guna is worrying about chanting. I'm worrying about him believing in God. And you know, like you said, I really loved what you said about the respectful communication and listening. But you know, I can't say I didn't lose it at one point because I didn't know how to relate to that. The actual. So did you ever? And I've actually since met quite a few Gurukula graduates that also think about it. Is Krishna really God? Is he even there? So one thing, chanting and all that, worrying about, and the actual, you know, because obviously we know with my daughter I still have a little bit to go to the teenage times, but I'm grateful for some advice for the future. But yeah, I don't know what to do with the devotees that are not sure about the actual existence of God. Would you be so kind to if you ever come across it in your discussions?
Yes, there's a lot of our Gurukulis, a lot of them who've lost their faith.
Okay.
There's a lot, and we became aware of that when our kids were teenagers, how many of their friends didn't believe in Krishna anymore. I offered at one point to start doing these kinds of discussions with the Gurukula students when they were young. We don't have time right now, but I personally think philosophical discussion, you know, I think we stress too much the externals, how we dress, how we know just the externals, and we don't stress enough having deep philosophical discussions with our children. And I think we need to have those deep, not in a way that we're lecturing them. We never, when we used to do Gita, even now when we do Gita discussions with our children, when they were younger, before they hit their teens, every weekend when they weren't at school, we used to sit down as a family and discuss Gita. We never lectured them. We'd read a sentence or a paragraph and then a sentence, and we'd get our children to speak first. And we would reflect back to them. We'd get them in the habit of talking philosophy. And when they would bring up their doubts and their challenges, we'd never lose it. We'd say, oh, that's a really good point. I've sometimes thought that too. How would you resolve this? And if they couldn't resolve it, then we'd share our thoughts and we'd try to find some evidences from Prabhupada. And it was really, we have to discuss philosophy in a mutually respectful way. I don't have enough knowledge how to bring back those who are faithless, but I think those who still have a little faith or a little innocent, we need to start investing in getting them to discuss philosophy. And for them to discuss philosophy, a very important thing is they have to see their parents doing it. If we never sit down and discuss Gita together, it's almost as if we're imposing something artificial on them. But if it's a part of our life, then husband and wife, we sit down on the weekend if we can't manage to during the week, and we discuss a little philosophy and we invite them, hey, come and join in. Look what we just heard, what we're talking about. Get them involved. If they see it's a part of our parents' life, it's much more likely to become a part of their life. Our kids went away from it for a long time during their teenage years. But now that they're married and they've got their own families, they're beginning to implement because they saw us doing it all through their childhood and youth. You know, so it's our own example speaks very loudly. I don't know how to bring back those who've lost their faith, but we need to invest in those who haven't yet lost their faith. I don't know if it helped at all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mata. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. I think that there's no further questions. Maybe we should finish there, huh?
Yes. Thank you so much, Prabhu, Cintamani Prabhu and Krishna Dhamma Prabhu. It was very enlivening, very inspiring, and something we can all take with us and try to implement at least something in our lives.
Yeah.
We have these videos. I've been doing the videos teaching how to do it. So they're all on the Improving Our Sarasanga website. They're just there's like different videos on each point, each principle, how to improve our discussions. And I hope they can be of help to people who want to give it a go.
Yeah, and please, I'd like to reiterate, do get in touch if you have any questions about it. You know, we're always happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna, everyone.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.